professions, but also academics majoring in journalism. Well, I see Marie next. Please go ahead.
I'm Marie. I'm from Germany, and also I'm based in Berlin right now. And I am studying political science and want to go into politics and into journalism with covering political issues. And I'm also happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Well, I see a couple more hands, but in the meantime, please let's be cautious to mute ourselves when we're not speaking. And as this is our first session, even though it's 10 right now in New York, but I guess you can take a couple more minutes as this is going great, as brief introductions. But just to let you know, we already have Yuksel and Melissa on board, so we'll start shortly. Yes, Fiona, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm Fiona Brown from Canada. I'm an author and environmental advocate and focal point for Children's Affairs for Children and Youth Major Group of the United Nations Environment Program. And I'm very pleased to be here for a productive discussion. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you so much. Well, a couple more hands. Orji, would you like to go next?
Okay, good day, everyone. I am Nachi Chinoso from Nigeria. I'm a student of diploma in journalism and a freelance video journalist. Happy to join us here to learn more about journalism. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Last two, then we can take the discussion on the Q&A as well, and we'll have more opportunities to engage with each other. Rosabelle, please go ahead.
Hi everyone, my name is Rosabelle. I'm from the UK, but I live in Beirut in Lebanon, where I've been working as a journalist for the last 2 years, covering Lebanese affairs and wider in the region. And thanks for the opportunity to learn more about the industry and important issues and to meet everyone. It's great.
Thank you so much. And lastly, let's hear from Mehmet. I do apologize.
Mehmet.
Yes, I think I did a so-so job.
It's fine. I'm Mehmet. My name means gift. I'm from Malawi, the home heart of Africa. I'm a radio presenter and a producer, also a student majoring in mass communication. Sure. Great to be here.
Well, great. Okay, I do see one more hand, but let this be the last one. And as I mentioned, we'll have 30 minutes at the second half of the program to engage with everybody. So lastly, I'll take it from Hayley, and let's then move on with our program. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Hayley Mahari from Ethiopia, and I'm a radio presenter and producer for the last 7 years. Now I am a manager of FM station this year. So thank you very much. I'm glad to see here all of you to upgrade our media engagement. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. So let's start with the program timeline. Let's proceed as we have a lot to cover today. And as I mentioned, the last 30 minutes will be devoted to another round of meet and greet, and we would love to have your reflections by then as well. Mehmet, turning over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all joining us from all over the world. Welcome to our first session of the Media and Journalism Webinars 2023, organized by the Journalists and Rights Foundation. My name is Mehmet Kilic. I am the president of the JWF, and I'm very happy to be among you today. Let me brief you a little bit about the JWF, which is an international civil society organization dedicated to the culture of peace, human rights, and sustainable development. We are based in New York and associated with the UN Department of Global Communications. The Media and Journalism Webinars is a certificate program, as you know, that emphasizes hands-on learning through intensive webinars, training, mentorship, and interactive discussions with professional journalists. And we have two wonderful journalists with us today. And this program aims to prepare you to succeed in building a career in journalism and media while fostering experiential learning by translating knowledge and skills into experience. So the program involves research, interviews, and news article writing that lead to meaningful understanding of the profession of journalism, communications, and the media. And today's webinar is about the role of media in promoting and protecting human rights, which is very, very important for democracy, the rule of law, and fundamental human rights, including freedom of speech, freedom, press freedom, and many more. Of course, this program is organized by my colleagues, Cemre Ulker, our UN representative and US director, Priyanka Chahal, our UN youth representative and associate, and Zoya Ansari, our graduate student from India. So without further ado, I would like to pass it over to my colleague, Cemre Ulker.
Thank you so much, Mehmet, and taking the second to mute some of the friends who are recently joining. Yes, once again, greetings, everybody. I have already introduced myself, and thank you so much to Mehmet for his remarks too. So this is the 4th year of media and journalism webinars, and we're really thrilled with the turnout of all the applications this year. As I mentioned, young colleagues on board, journalists, academics who are enrolled in communication majors, media majors, and what I like most about this year's cohort is that we also have civil society members, not journalists, not communication experts or academics studying in this area, but everybody here in the room would like to learn more from the expert speakers and facilitate their skills on how to convey whichever working area that they're specializing in, the message, the best practices that they're leading in those areas to the wider community. So that is very important for me. I love the diversity here. And this year we have participants from 29 countries, and we will be hosting 11 speakers from 6 countries. So glad to be moving on with the sessions, as we will hear from sometimes journalists, sometimes film producers. We will have expert journalists that we will tune from conflict zones. So please do take this opportunity to engage with the speakers in the chat. Please do share your comments and questions, so at least we have a line for the Q&A session as well. And this is a great opportunity to network among ourselves too. As I mentioned, diversity in the room is great. Please do share your Twitter accounts, Instagram, LinkedIn, whichever you use the most. And I would love if Priyanka can take a moment to share our socials as well. Do tag us in your social media posts as well. Just going over my reminders before I move on with Melissa and Yuksel. A couple more stuff that I would like to share. I see that majority of us are having their cameras on. Great. It's fascinating to see everybody's faces while we are having these sessions. And if not, please rename yourselves as you apply to the program, because we are taking attendance. And as mentioned a couple of times, the webinars are taking place in the form of 5 different sessions, and 3 is mandatory to receive the certificate. So we do appreciate if everybody renames themselves. That'd be great to learn about your countries too. So please don't forget to add on whichever country you're joining the session from as well. So let's see. Priyanka did open a WhatsApp group. Again, we are having these communications ongoing afterwards, the programs as well. Whenever you write an article or you join a program as a speaker, do let us know. We love to disseminate your best practices, your articles, whichever working area that you're leading the affairs to. So that is covered as well. And I guess I'm all done with my reminders. So let's move on with the program. So session one, we will be speaking about the role of media in promoting and protecting human rights. And as you know, despite the fundamental role of media and journalism in enabling a free and independent flow of information to foster peaceful and inclusive societies, there is also a quite worrisome and constant decline in press freedom recorded over the last decade. And in their recent reporting, Committee to Protect Journalism, journalists also indicated that the number of journalists jailed around the world yet set another record just last year, 2022. And I'm also a faculty member at UNITAR's Global Diplomacy Initiative, and we do talk about the rise of authoritarian regimes, their oppressive governments, limiting the space of journalists and media members. So I do see a quite worrisome, again, trend between the rise of authoritarianism and decline of press freedoms, as well to stifle diversity among the society, pluralism, and etc. And now we will be tuning to our two expert speakers for today, the format is going to be Q&A. So me and Mehmet will be posting questions. We'll have their short answers, and moving on, we will set the stage so that everybody can engage on the topics that we have been covering on. So today I'm very much pleased to host Melissa and Yuksel. Melissa Mahtani is an Emmy-nominated senior producer and reporter for CNN's award-winning digital team. Mahtani is currently also reporting for CNN's award-winning gender-focused As Equals team as well, and she is leading many other programs, and we will soon hear more from her too. But she's been hosting many world-renowned speakers, experts at different human rights conferences too. And we will also hear from Yuksel Durgut. He's the spokesperson of the International Journalists Association. He served as a bureau chief of several media outlets for almost over a decade, worked from conflict zones, and he's also the editor-in-chief of the Journalist Post magazine. So welcome on board, Yuksel and Melissa. So I would like to go ahead and post my first question to Melissa. Greetings again, Melissa. So could you please tell us how your international reporting journey started? As you have been hearing, we have colleagues joining us from different parts of the world, and I would love to learn more about your journey from an international perspective. You're based in US, but have you worked in any other countries? And you're now leading important programs at CNN, one of the world's mostly well-known media outlets. So that would be great if we can learn more about your role at the legendary Farhad Zakaria's GPS program as well. I'm a fan. So I would love to hear your remarks on that as well, please.
Thank you very much. First, I want to say that it is such an absolute pleasure to be joining all of you. And it's amazing to see so many people from so many different countries, as you said. The world needs more journalists. So we're counting on all of the students who are here today to be the eyes and ears of the rest of the world as you enter the profession. As for me, so my career started about 20 years ago, and I'm living in the US, but as you can hear, I am not American. I actually grew up in Zambia in Africa and then lived in London. And my start in journalism was, so I'm telling you the honest story, you know, not the varnished one, but it was really from doing work experience at school. So in England, the way that the school system works is you start work placements quite early when you're sort of 16 and 17 and 18. And I had done a work placement at a PR company, and I was really just working, trying to see, getting an idea of what I would like to do. And for me, I think there is a big difference between actually being in the office and seeing hands-on how things work, as opposed to studying and seeing what things should be like. We all know there's a big difference. And I remember I was in a PR company and I was just shocked. I felt like it was unjust to be working like this to make a company richer when there were so many other people around the world that needed help, or that it wasn't fair, or that we should be drawing attention to. So that's actually, it was a hands-on experience learning what I didn't want to do that made me realize that what I really wanted to do was to be working in journalism, where I very much wanted the world to dictate what I would be doing, not a corporation. And from there, I went into a production company and was working I started off as an AP. I was working with a company that worked with Reuters and AP to do basic news feeds. So you would go to a place and you would just be the eyes and ears of people that couldn't actually be there, showing them what was going on. Mm-hmm. And from there, I then decided to go to journalism school and started at CNBC in London and ITN, which is another local British station. And then I got my first job, which I would say was kind of like my big break, which was at France 24. And you asked if I'd worked in other countries. And so I did. And that was very interesting for me, because having worked in England, where there was an established way to do things, and that's something that I was very used to because I'd gone to school there. And even though I had lived in Africa and, I had a lot more international experience, when I went to France 24, I will say it was one of the most diverse newsrooms I've ever worked in. And that was because we had the France 24 is a channel that broadcasts in English, French, and Arabic. And by nature of that, we had 3 desks where we would all be discussing the news of the day and how we were going to present it in our newscasts. And that was during the Arab Spring. And I was a producer. I had previously, in the companies I'd been in, been a field producer going out doing these news feeds, as I had said, for AP and Reuters, and traveling the world and trying to be the eyes and ears for like basic news feeds. Mm-hmm. Then when I went to France 24, I was producing daily live rolling news, but it was during the Arab Spring. And it was fascinating because it was extremely hectic and we had a very small team, but we really were seeing the world change before our eyes. And it was a huge responsibility and a privilege, but it was also the diversity of that newsroom. People always talk about diversity and we think about it in kind of geography or age. But here it was really interesting because to have an Arabic desk that was made up of Egyptians and Tunisians and Lebanese who were all seeing things differently in relation to what was happening in Egypt and Tunisia, at the time, and equally French, and then equally Anglos from all over the world. Everybody had different opinions. And so we all came together and we would discuss different ideas for guests that added richness, or we would have different takeaways that, would explain some of the complexities, which I think is hugely important in any type of journalism. And anyway, I was there for 3 years working in Paris, and I was applying to CNN because I really wanted to work for a big organization. And I would apply and I would apply and apply and get rejected and rejected and rejected. And it became sort of a daily thing. Anything that I could do, I knew that's where I wanted to go. And eventually, after about 3 years, I got an interview. And it was for a writer-producer position. And I had been producing like live newscasts at France 24 and covering rolling news of 4 hours live. And so this was a very different position. But I took it and I moved to London and I started working on Becky Anderson's show, Connect the World, which was and it was very different because at CNN, you were working on one show as opposed to doing these rolling live bulletins. But it was from there, and then I worked my way up from a writer-producer to a producer. I launched shows. I launched Charlie Garani's show in London, and then I moved to the US. I launched a business show, and then that's where I first started working with Fareed Zakaria because that was CNN US, and it was very, very interesting. He's, of course, very intelligent. They have some of the best people in the business who work on their team. I was actually working for them on Sunday as obviously this news of Russia broke out, and we had actually filmed and produced a lovely interview with Emmanuel Macron last week. If you watched the show, you would have seen 2 blocks ahead of that. But we had produced the whole show, 60 minutes, beautiful. And then obviously the news broke out, and we had to change up, and most of that didn't get seen by the world. And we all went into the office and we produced a live news show. And it's very interesting working with them. You again, that diversity of thought that you get on the show discussing ideas and thinking about ways that we can really convey new angles and ideas to the world is very important.
Well, thank you so much for this great start off to today's conversation. And fascinating to hear your career journey, and you present a flawless transition, but I'm pretty sure every step of the way was quite tough, building up such a glorious career. And I'm sure we will have more questions in that transition period from our young colleagues, our participants who are just studying these majors. And especially during the times of conflict, there is an immense, severe trend of disinformation and misinformation flowing around the society. And maybe we'll dive more into this particular topic in the Q&A too, because having this expertise, I would love to learn more from your tactics on which tools or thinking processes that you led to filter these things, because directing a live show, you said 4 hours and stuff is quite a tough thing to do. So we'll turn back on that to you later. Mehmet, over to you.
Well, our next speaker is Yuksel Durgut, joining us from Germany, and he's a prominent journalist and reporter. Welcome, Yuksel.
Thank you very much, Mehmet.
Thank you. It's great to have you with us. And my first question to you is that you started your career early in the 1990s, and you worked abroad as a bureau chief and a war reporter in many countries. But after 2016, you had to leave Turkey due to the some human rights violations and shrinking space of media in Turkey. So I would appreciate if you could tell us more about your journalism work in exile and inform our audience about the International Journalists Association, which you founded in Germany.
I would like to just thank you to all, Mehmet, Cemre, for this invitation. I'm really pleasure to just meet, especially Melissa and many other colleagues, because when Cemre just announced that, many of them are just students, I also just started my PhD. So it means I'm also just a student, there is no time to just learn it. So after 50 years old, I started my education again. It's a little bit difficult to just finish it, but let us see. Well, the exile, I'm just having this question during the many international conferences. So, during the conferences, the people are just trying to just understand what the exile means. So what does it look like, or how a journalist can be in exile? So let me tell, firstly, it's not easy to be an exile journalist in any circumstances. So exiles are mostly, over 35 years old, whom I know, especially in Germany, over maybe 400 journalists whom I know who are exiled. They are all the ages are over 35 years old. So you are just leaving everything on your behind, even your diplomas, your career, your job, so your family. So you are just coming because we are just coming here as illegal ways to Europe to survive. So you are coming here with one bag. All in your bag, you are just carrying your career and whatever just I told you. So that becomes a more difficult to just survive, because after 2016, the coup attempt in Turkey witnessed a significant decline in press freedom, leading to many journalists leaving the country to continue their work in a safer places. It's important to note that the journalism work in exile is not easy, what I told, depending on circumstances. Like we are just living in a country where the democracy is. So, but the abuses, corruptions, and other issues within their home countries, keeping to always just look to just get your sources. But it's really just difficult to just get sources, to get the stories, to just, still just writing about it, public information, despite the challenges we are just facing on. So, I would like to just maybe, if I can just do it, to just share something, because which I just saw. Can I do that? Yes. Here, maybe you can just see how, the exiled journalism in many countries. This is the RSF just prepared this, the map. You can just see many journalists who have just left their countries, and especially, on undemocratic countries to the, to democratic countries in Europe and to North America is the mostly is there. So that's why, when we are just talking about, this map, and this map showing the migratory flows of journalists who are forced to flee their country for safety reasons, and the countries that host exile media. Most of the countries that provide refugee to threatened or persecuted journalists are located in Europe or North America, as you have seen it. So, we, as the International Journalists Association, the question which you have just, asked to me is also a global organization dedicated to promoting and protecting journalistic integrity, freedom of the press, and the rights of the journalists around the world, which is established in 2017 after the coup attempt in Turkey, and journalists France through fought to protect the rights of the people who are arrested and were in the jail. So I was one of them also. I was also jailed for more than a year, only because of my journalism career that I was working for in Turkey. So with members from various countries and backgrounds, and the International Journalists Association aims to foster international collaboration, support journalists in their work, and advocate for press freedom. So we are just providing a platform for journalists to connect, exchange ideas, and share resources in facilities, networking opportunities, both online and through organized events. So allowing journalists to build professional relationship and collaborate on projects on mutual interest. So I'm also the chief editor of the Journalist Post magazine, and all of my colleagues can also just look and can be the member of the association as a journalist. And we've just got a Journalist Post magazine, which is the unique in the world, just established the printing with 3 languages, English, German, and Turkish language. And each issue, more than 20 countries contributing all over the world. The journalists are sending their stories about the human rights violations and the the freedom of press and freedom of expressions in their countries. So we are just publishing it in 3 languages, 3 different languages. Also, it's online. Also, it's printing, and we are just sending it to all the people who are really just interested on it, like the politicians and parliamentarians, especially in Europe. So I'm the chief editor of this magazine so far. So this is all the things which I would like to say at the moment. Mehmet.
Well, thank you, Yuksel, for sharing your journalism career. And also what I've learned from your experience as a journalist in exile is that journalists are resilient. Journalists are very strong. Journalists endure for all human rights violations. And I can see the passionate, person that even though you lost, different media platforms, that the TV stations or newspapers were closed down, shut down, you are still looking for other opportunities using social media or having news media outlets just like the associations, just like the International Journalists Association, to continue your journalism. So I can see that it takes a lot of dedication and hard work, your resilience, strength, and I also see that with the map that you shared with us, we always talk about refugees, going from countries to, like safe countries, but journalists are also refugees. Sometimes they become refugee, not because of climate change or like wars and other things, but they are refugees because of their journalism profession. So thank you so much for joining and, sharing these ideas with us. Now I'm giving it back to Cemre for the next round of questions.
Thank you. Yuksel, thank you so much for your opening initial remarks and That was great that you brought up the Reporters Without Borders latest, as you said, map of showing the moving trend of journalists from different geographies. And maybe in the Q&A discussion, we would love to hear more on what sort of best practices you took driving your way to combat systemic paperwork, legal barriers that many of the journalists are going through, especially language is quite a serious barrier. So we can talk more about it in the Q&A session too. So thank you so much for your initial reflections. So Melissa, over to you again. We have shared a couple reflections on this earlier as well, but like you do, of course, very closely following up on your work, credible reporting as well, but Geneva Summit and Oslo Freedom Forum. These are my definitely top two human rights platforms. These two global human rights platforms, and you have been attending these arenas where we hear from fearless human rights defenders, former political prisoners. You engage with them in meaningful ways to expose their sometimes speechless years that they spent paying the price of freedom. And you were recently in two of those hosting remarkable panelists, and we did share your recording from Geneva Summit, hosting Berta Vele and Felix Maradiaga, the famous Nicaraguan former political prisoner, who I'm very much pleased to meet Berta in person too. She was fascinating, leading the battle for her dear husband, but raised a tremendous awareness globally on how these remarkable minds are kept as hostage, so to say, in their respective countries as political prisoners. And Masih al-Najat as well, another remarkable name that you have been interviewing in a couple occasions already. So I would love to have your reflections from these summits. The dissidents that you spoke with are human rights defenders, as I've been putting out, where press freedom is very, very low. So how does this status quo affect the rest of the fundamental human rights oppressed in these countries, from your expertise meeting and interviewing these remarkable either former political prisoners or human rights defenders, pioneers?
Thank you so much. Absolutely. I have to say that I love these two forums, the Oslo Freedom Forum and the Geneva Summit. And I have been going and moderating panels there for probably the past 5 years. And they are always some of the highlights of my year. I think it's fundamental for us as journalists to really raise awareness of these issues and give these people a spotlight. And this is another way, as well as our work, whether that be television or whether you're writing an article, but really to be there on the global stage and be able to hear from these people and really get their stories out in a way that the rest of the world can understand. It was phenomenal to interview Felix Maradiaga, because last year I was at the same summit and I was interviewing and spending a lot of time with his wife, where she was campaigning for his freedom. So to actually see the difference that all of us can make, and to see that by us writing articles, by putting pressure on these governments, that can be one of the little tiny pieces that leads to the change in him actually being freed and being able to be there with his wife on stage, was incredible. The same thing with the Oslo Freedom Forum, Masih al-Najat. These are people that in their respective countries, whether it be Nicaragua, whether it be Iran, whether it be China, these are authoritarian leaders that are trying to silence these people. And they silence them because they obviously see them as a threat. But to the second half of your question, there's a direct correlation between trying to silence dissidents, trying to silence the press. And equally in Geneva, I will say, another interview that I did was with a Turkish journalist, so Nevzin Mengu, and we've just heard, from Yuksel talking about how he's living in exile. I mean, that was right after the Turkish election. So sometimes you're interviewing human rights defenders, and that can be people who have been political prisoners. It can be journalists, because they are also representing the human rights of that country and trying to get real information out. The way that I see it is very simple. if we're not raising awareness of these issues and of these things and giving these people a voice, then people in the countries that they're in and the rest of the world don't know what's happening. And if you don't know what's happening, you can't do anything about it. And freedom of the press has always been essential because it's vital to democracies to have a well-informed electorate. If you don't know what's going on, as I said, you can't take action and you can't take informed decisions. So it's our job to be able to shine a light, to give a voice to the voiceless, and to make sure that in countries where dictators are trying to silence the press, silence dissidents, silence as many people as they can, to present one narrative of the story, it's our job to actually tell the truth about what's going on and do that in a responsible way by telling each side of the story. And so that's what I've really been trying to do. And that's what I do in these summits. And I think as journalists, we have a responsibility to do also, because it's not just about these people, but it's about being journalists that hold governments to account, whether that be governments that are authoritarian or our own governments, or to sometimes show the shades of gray in terms of the negotiations that are happening in them. So for example, in Nicaragua, I was speaking to Felix, but it was interesting to see what happened to lead to his release in the US, what happened between the US and Nicaragua, and to expose all these shades of gray so that we can learn from what worked and what didn't.
Yes, and as you said, Felix also talked about it. And if not yet, please, colleagues in the room, do watch her interview, both with Nevşin and Felix. Melissa did a great job, but her guests were quite empowered as well. So they had many, many things to share. But there was one takeaway that really fascinated me. So Felix said, and I guess he's leading some initiatives, particularly on the political prisoners as well, calling on intergovernmental agencies to do a more meaningful actions, lead decisive actions for their release. He said, we have to keep sort of bothering, please excuse my language, but bothering these autocrats so that at some point, when they calculate the minuses and pluses, releasing political prisoners out of their way is more advantageous in their status. And whatever it takes for these brilliant minds to be released political prisoners, we have to do it. And as you said, press is one of the most empowering ways to do this, disseminate this information. These two human rights platforms are doing a fascinating job creating these arenas for us to hear your expertise and meeting with these distinguished experts. And Nevşin was very clear in her remarks that pluralism in Turkey, which is a competitive authoritarian state at this point, is overwashed.
If I could just add, I mean, you're absolutely right with what Felix said. And also at the Oslo Freedom Forum, I've spent a lot of time with Evgenia Kara-Murza, who is the wife of Vladimir Kara-Murza, who is an opposition political leader who's in prison in Russia at the moment. I had the distinct privilege of actually interviewing Vladimir Kara-Murza a couple of years ago, probably 3 years ago. So to know somebody and to have heard from them and to see them now in prison, you know, you do feel like it's personal. Obviously, I can't compare to what she feels like, but I mean, this is just a fraction of it. And one of the things that he said is there's nothing worse than a political prisoner feeling like the world has forgotten about them. And so by doing these interviews and by continuing to get the word out, we are raising awareness and making it difficult for these authoritarian leaders to try and make the world forget about them, because we are, again, reminding everybody in Russia and outside of Russia about the human rights violations that are going on.
Surely. Thank you so much. So, Yuksel, you had years of journalism expertise in Turkey, and while I was introducing you, you led important work in many of the conflict zones too. And Turkey is at this point one of the 4 countries with the lowest ranking of media freedom, with one of the countries with highest number of journalists imprisoned, as you shared from your personal story too. You were once imprisoned for your brave journalism, putting out trustworthy news for public to be aware of state-led crimes. So I would love to hear more from you. How did silencing media, let's speak on this country case example, how did silencing media impacted democracy in Turkey? I guess you're on mute.
Sorry. Before that, there is a poll which I would like to just get the audience's response. There are two questions. Maybe you have just seen that one, and if you could like to just answer that one, because it's going to be more important for me to just go ahead. And because we all people are just living in a democratic countries or undemocratic countries. I would like to just know that one if you are just believing it. Or the second one is how the press can be a role model of the democracy. So about your question, Cemre, because the way the press emerged in Turkey and the process that prepared it developed differently from the West. Because contrary to the West, it was realized with the support of the state, not with economic and social dynamics, but with political dynamics all the time. The first newspaper was published by the state as a means of westernizing the society in Turkey, and the development of the press in later periods was built on this ground. So discuss the formation of the Turkish press in a different structure from its counterparts in the West. So in the influence of the state on his exits has followed the Turkish press throughout its history, from the beginning to Turkish press when its landscape, except for the very short periods of time, was its dependence on the state and its statist attitude. So during the periods when totalitarian tendencies were dominant in the world, the political structure in Turkey, and therefore the press was also affected by this. And the political structure in Turkey was relatively freer during the periods when liberal tendencies were active. So the point that should be emphasized here is that the change in the world significantly directs the political life in Turkey in general and the freedom of the press. And the press, which took a relatively relief when the multi-party democratic regime was introduced in Turkey, was also subjected to create pressure during the military interventions and the extraordinary administration. So journalists were killed, put in prisons, newspapers have been made breathless by suspensions and closures. So we have just seen it after 2016 coup attempt in Turkey, hundreds of them, and still they are just banned to, even as an exiled journalist, we cannot just, announce our voices to Turkey because they are all just banned. YouTube, Twitter, people cannot just follow the news stories. So while the censorship decrees were signed by the government without any hesitation, closures of newspapers, magazines, and even printing presses became the norm. The violations and murders against journalists are another issue which we are just facing it all the time in Turkey. The only couple of weeks back, one of journalists just beaten by the bodyguards of one of governors because of his stories, which is just published. So torture and killing of the journalists continue till to this day, and they are even the intelligence agencies of Turkey. They are just targeting the journalists abroad who are exiled. We have just seen it in Europe last year. Many journalists are just their houses are just published in the newspaper, which is just supported by the government. Their families' pictures just published. And a couple of them are already just beaten in Europe. So we are not just facing, just so secure in Europe also. So the legal and the structural reforms taking place in Turkey during the European Union process perhaps offered an important opportunity to change this process, but it didn't just done. Because it was, when the Turkish president Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he became in the power the last 20 years, and he promised to the Turkish people about the European Union process, but he didn't just obey these rules. So in this process, a serious dilemma emerged in Turkish media, while the Turkish media maintains its statistic and authorization attitude that comes from past and is emergent its genius. On the other hand, it has stopped between a major structure dominated by capital that emerged with the charging world conditions and globalization, and the change in direction of freedoms in the European Union process also. So they didn't give up the habits they inherited from their past, nor on freedom and democracy completely. So in recent years, Turkish media has become monopolistic in the Republican period, so like the one-party period time. So now it's a one-man regime is just going on in Turkey. For example, after this election in May, the Erdogan is more autocratic than the previous times. So he is now, he's just building his monarchy system. Maybe his son or his son-in-law is just going to be talking in the backstage. So finally, the Turkish democracy and Turkish people always lose. So, and despite the format changes, this fact never changes.
Thank you so much. And you touched upon a very important point of transnational crimes, and the recent reporting of Council of Europe is quite in-depthly speaking of this, and excuse me, they particularly listed harassment of journalists as among the top 5 transnational crimes. Very unfortunate, but autocratic governments like Iran, Egypt, Turkey are leading in not only in their countries, but threatening the peace and security across their borders too. And my next question was very much linked to that. So maybe I can get your initial responses on it. You basically touched upon it, but if there's anything else. So the Positive Peace Index that I am very much closely following too, they indicate that it's 11th year of deterioration of global peace, stability, security across the world. And we do see a positive trend in between oppressing the free flow of information, the transnational crimes, and the positive peace. So do you have any extra remarks that you would like to reflect on the relation of peacefulness, cohesiveness inside societies, as you have been reporting from Turkey, one of the most polarized, marginalized societies by this age?
Well, what I would like to just said, I was in a city, Bonn, in Germany. There was a World Press, forum. It was almost maybe more than 1,000 people attended there. When I was just looking for all the audiences in this conference room, thousands of people. When there is a question about how many of them are exiled, the half of them are exiled. They are just living in exile. And the chats which we were just doing, we always just talk about the journalism, freedom of expression, freedom of press, in any conferences, in any place, and we are always just telling our stories to the people. But, when we are dying, when this idea is just dying, the autocratic regimes are always just increasing, in the world. About European Union, they couldn't just put the ideas against to Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey. They couldn't just ask him to go for human rights activities, so the freedom of press, but still the hundreds of journalists are just still in Turkey, and many the academicians, many the teachers are still just jailed in Turkey, and we could just break this idea. As I told, when we are just dying, this idea, the press, the freedom of the expression is just dying. All the autocratic regimes are increasing the last 10 years. Because, just look at Russia now. So we are just, another one is just coming, the Belarus. So we are just living in a Europe and in a democratic country. We always just talk about the freedom of expression. But in the other hand, there is a man who's just, abusing the idea of the press, but no one can just stop him. Or this is the main problem that we have to just talk about it right now.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. And Turkey is a very distinct country in that regards. And we were able to, unfortunately, observe the severe sliding back from democracy to autocracy. And in upcoming sessions, we will also discuss elections under autocracies and how the press is an influential tool existing even in this limited possible space. So Melissa, please do reflect your expertise, especially from covering Arab Spring too, a very chaotic time in which the press was very much oppressed too. So from that region particularly, could you please share your views on how the disabling atmosphere of free, independent, trustworthy news is impacting regional peace and security?
Sure. And I actually think more so than regionally, we should be looking at this globally, because there are global trends. You know, when Yuksel was just talking about the rise of authoritarianism in the past 10 years, I don't think it can be seen in isolation. We so often try and look at, oh, this is what's happening in the Middle East, or this is what's happening in China. But actually, I think what's more important is to look at how these countries are learning from each other and working together. You know, it is no... think about it. I mean, yesterday, with all that we've seen the turmoil in Russia, one of the first calls that Vladimir Putin had was with Iran. You know, they are sharing best practices, and that also involves like how to silence the media, how they are working with Venezuela. You know, the Iranian leader was just in Latin America. So you see very similar tactics in terms of how those countries are cracking down on dissidents, are cracking down on freedom of the press. And that has led to this kind of decline in peace freedom, because obviously smaller countries that have ties to those countries can learn from them. We've also seen this, you know, to a certain extent in the US, where in my last question, I was talking about, you know, freedom of the press and the ideals that we uphold, that the press should be a watchdog on government agencies. They should be holding people to account, and we should be informing society so they can make informed decisions. When you have a backsliding of that, like we've seen even in the US, you see this attack on media freedom, you see this attack on truth, and it's really a weaponization of truth so that people don't know what to believe. And that leads very much to the polarization of society. And this is something that we are seeing specifically in the US too. And I think that, again, on a global scale, people are seeing what's happening and trying to learn lessons from it, and seeing how the injection of disinformation can really begin to polarize societies and weaken them, and therefore weaken democracy. And that's something that we should all be very scared about. And I think that, I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but social media and technology has a role to play in that.
Thank you so much. I love one saying of Masih, and she repeats this tirelessly. She says, dictators are united under one club. Just like you said, and we must definitely do a better job in terms of that. So as citizen journalists, all of us here in the room, we do share news, we do repost expert analysis, opinions on news outlets, we take quotations from your remarks on live shows. So it's our responsibility to have some sort of filters too, to be cautious consumers of information out there, and it's very much reflecting on global peace and security, just like you said too. Colleagues, the sessions are recorded, by the way. I have seen a couple requests to record it, and when all the sessions are concluded, we will open the recordings for your ability to rewatch. So that is a quick note on that end. And I'll turn to Mehmet for his last question, but I see very, very good questions, comments noted in the Q&A session as well. So let's keep our reflections within some limited time. So I really want to turn back to the questions posted by our participants, because this is a very unique opportunity to have Melissa and Yuksel on board for the same time. So over to you, Mehmet, for your question.
Thank you, Cemre. The conversations are going so well, and it's very informative. So many experiences. Thank you so much. I just would like to remind you that this first session is dedicated to the role of media in promoting and protecting human rights. And this question is on that issue. So the question of freedom of expression and the internet and the challenges of ensuring freedom of expression on the internet. So according to Freedom House, 76% of the world population with internet access live in countries where individuals were arrested or imprisoned for posting content on political, social, or religious concern. Limiting the access to internet and social media outlets is usually the first attempt of authoritarian regimes to control the public discourse. So Melissa, my question to you, what are your thoughts on this new battle of information on the internet?
Thank you. I think this is very, very important. So I will say that, first of all, there's good and there's bad, right? Because with the rise of social media, we've also seen that it's been a platform and it's been much easier for for people to show human rights abuses in their country. And in fact, if you look back to the Arab Spring, the Egypt uprising was, in fact, the rise of that social media revolution. It was the first time we were seeing people being able to post very quickly on Twitter, being able to post on other mediums, what was actually happening, even though their governments didn't want that to be seen. So there are benefits that come from social media. I will say that when we look at some of the real dangers of them, Cemre just mentioned something that Masih Alinejad had said, and I actually interviewed Masih and a couple of other people on a panel to talk specifically about the role of technology and misinformation in terms of their campaigns and in their countries. And one of the things that Masih said, which I think is really, really important, is that we need to hold the technology companies account for their role in this, because it's not just about the states and the journalists or the citizens. And it's very interesting, as Masih often points out, that Twitter, and Elon Musk is a new part of that, but Twitter for a long time has allowed the Iranian leaders, the Afghanistan leaders to be on Twitter, even though those leaders do not allow their own citizens to be on those platforms. So there's a hypocrisy there. And we really do need to hold those companies, just like Facebook, accountable for some of the things that happen on their platforms, because it's too easy for leaders to shut down these platforms, number one, so that the news can't get out. And then we see these leaders weaponizing that disinformation with bots, but also then trying to imprison some of their citizens, silence them, very much like we've seen in Turkey. I've spoken to a lot of people it's not just social media, made documentaries and been forced to leave the country. The same thing in China. People, every single thing that they do is being watched, and we need to report about these issues, and we need to expose what those governments are doing and what the technology companies are doing in order to bring about change, so that these platforms can continue to be a force for good. And actually, just one thing I will add is I think sometimes we do always focus on the negative. We do need to see that, as Cemre was saying, it comes down to our responsibility too, because there's a reason why bad news and misinformation spreads very quickly. And that's because we all, as citizens, want to share it. And sometimes we do that without having checked it and verified it. And so we also need to increase, and this is something that I really think not just journalism students, but citizens as a whole need to have better media literacy classes to be able to tell fact from fiction, because there are the benefits of social media, which we want to keep and encourage. If you look at the Syrian revolution, some of the reasons why now the UN and other agencies are being able to build cases and talk about actual torture and various crimes against humanity are because these were all documented on social media. So we need to look at the good and the bad and look at our role and technology and other companies' role in the bad, and then try and find a way to fix it.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I think you touched upon very important issues of the positive and negative impact of internet and social media. But of course, we need fact checking, and also it is not only the society using social media and the internet, but the governments and authoritarian regimes are using the internet for misinformation and disinformation. Now, my same questions to Yuksel. What are your thoughts on this new battle of information on the internet?
Well, thank you. Communication represents a fundamental human right, as well as being a necessary and important human need. So far, the concept of the right to communicate, on the other hand, defines communication as a right and refers to freedom of expression and to pluralist democracy. The recognition of the right to communication is essential for improving human rights standards. The right to communicate enables the sharing of different views and meanings. The right to communicate is also important in terms of freedom of expression and the media and internet freedom in a democratic society. So one of the most common ways of freedom of thought and expression can be expressed by the press. So this is how as an exiled journalist, we do it. We don't have any weapon to announce our, the stories to the people who are in Turkey or in other countries which are just, undemocratically and in dictatorships. So only the way the people can just, to give their voices through the Twitter or YouTube or, Instagram. But we have just seen it during the elections in Turkey. The journalists who are exiled in Germany, they are just, making the stories. In couple of hours, the Turkish government just banning their, the accounts in YouTube, accounts in the Twitter, and the Elon Musk. And, he announced that, we are just, dealing with the Turkish government. We cannot just, open these Twitter accounts through the Turkey, because in the other background, Elon Musk have just got a, business with the Turkish government through the Tesla. So one of the, this is I see two difficulties in this issue. The first thing, through the social media and the internet, the fake news and the censorship. The speed of the fake and the false information and disinformation is so fast, so the public opinion can be easily manipulated to decrease social polarization. This situation also harms freedom of expression easily. And another issue is censorship is in internet access. So the VPN. And I'm always just, telling my stories, even I was just thinking to just write a book about the VPN. The cover is going to be the VPN, because the VPN is very important for me when I was in Turkey, the people cannot just access to the true stories if you do not have a smartphone, if you do not have an internet connection, and if you do not have a VPN application in your telephone in handy. So, the VPN is definition of freedom for me. So in countries like Turkey, and for example, there was a guy whom I met last week. He was from Kashmir, in the Indian Kashmir side. So he's just, the followers in YouTube, maybe almost more than 100,000 people. But he said, I cannot just access to these viewers in my area because it's banned. And I asked him, why not a VPN? And he said, even the people cannot just, go through the VPN. They are just, the government's trying to just block this idea also. So if they had the opportunity, they would ban it immediately. So many exiled journalists, as I told, from Turkey are banned from YouTube also. And it restricts freedom of expression by blocking or censorship websites. This means that governments or authoritarian regimes block access to certain information or views. In addition, internet service providers or platforms also practice content censorship. As I told the Elon Musk the story, this is detrimental to freedom of expression because misinformation and disinformation, the fake news, can manipulate public opinion easily, spread misunderstanding, and increase the social polarization also. Mehmet?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Yuksel, for sharing all this information with us. And I know that we have limited time. We would like to move on to the Q&A session. I'm giving it to Cemre.
Thank you. And one last comment that I would love to add on what Melissa has brought up to our attention. Recently, the International Criminal Court prosecutor, Karim Khan, he announced that a couple of years ago, it was not this case, but recent amendments came through, and now social media posts, of course, there are some standards, but they are now accepted as credible evidences. And the recent arrest warrant that was issued for Putin and the Children's Rights Commissioner was heavily based on what is posted out there in the social media. So it's very, very important from our end as citizen journalists to be cautious on what we post and which sort of information we do consume. So let's move on with the Q&A. I see fascinating questions. We have about 25 minutes, and I would love to get the most out of this part of the question. So I will now call on colleagues who wrote their posts here in the Q&A. That would be great if you can very briefly introduce yourself, which country you're participating from, and post your questions. So I see Anna first. But you posted 2 questions, Anna. That would be great if you can maybe prioritize one and concise it together. Please, the floor is yours, if you're available to unmute yourself.
Yes, of course. So I'm just trying to find it back in the chat. I didn't really save it before sending it in, so sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, I had a question, or more like questions for Melissa. Oh, there. Where is it?
Scroll
really
to the
sorry.
very beginning. It's okay. I think it was the first question posted.
Yeah, it was, but I can't. Oh yeah, there we go. So I would like to ask you, Melissa, so I was wondering what lessons have you learned from working in an international newsroom back in France? How did it affect your journalistic work afterwards? And I'm also curious about what is it like working in the US versus in Europe instead of freedom of expression as a journalist and working cultures in general.
Thank you very much for the question. So I'm going to answer this as quickly as possible, but in 3 parts, because there are really 3 parts to your question. So what lessons have I learned really, as I said at the beginning, France 24 to me was a very cosmopolitan newsroom in the sense that, like I said, we had these 3 desks, the Anglo, the French, and the Arabic. And, when I say French, it's not like they were all from France. You had them from the French Caribbean. You had them from, some of the former French colonies. So, I mean, their viewpoints were very different to some of the people who were reporting from those Arab countries where the Arab uprisings, the Arab Spring was taking place. And then again, people from the Anglo world, Australia, America, England. And what I really saw there was this diversity of thought and opinion showed me the very different shades of gray that we have. And one of the lessons that I learned is just every story you're approaching, you have to be so careful to check unconscious bias that you might have. So, for example, when I'm reporting on a story, and this is why when I was producing live news shows, I would always encourage discussion from my teams, because people see things differently. People are never going to see the world exactly as how you see it, right? And you need to make sure that you're addressing some of the other issues that people have in your reporting. So you need to be very conscious of that. And I think that was one of the things, that there are shades of gray in terms of like, okay, this is a story that's happening. This is how most people are seeing it. But this is also some of the questions other people have, the reservations they have, and how can we address that? How can we be inclusive? How can we make sure we're answering what everybody wants to know, and kind of think outside of yourself? And so diversity is not just geography, and it's not just age. We really need to think about this in terms of people's mentality of where they come from. And then what was it like working in the US versus Europe? This is a very good question. When I was based in the UK and when I was based in Europe, news, we had a common denominator of fact because things are regulated there. So for example, in England, you have Ofcom, and Ofcom is a government organization where basically you cannot report something that is untrue because you could get fined. So everybody is starting from a basic common denominator of fact. It's the same thing in Europe. Or at least, in France and some of the Western European countries. And this ensures that society has a base level that everybody can agree upon, and then you have opinion. In the US, what is very, very different to me was that it is very polarized. So people switch on the news that they want to hear. So for example, if you want to watch something that agrees with your point of view, you switch on a certain channel, and you can equally switch off what you don't want. And then you're living in this kind of tunnel where you're only hearing opinions you like, or opinions that are reinforcing your own. And that is not good, because that's not true. You don't have this base level of fact. And that's why we're seeing this polarization of societies. And I think that that's very dangerous. It's a cautionary tale made worse by social media. And it's something that we really, really need to address because we all need to be understanding a base level of what truth is.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Melissa, for your response. Let's move on with Zamir Hassan from India. That would be great if we did not hear from you in the very early opening. Very, very brief introduction on your would be much appreciated too, if you're available to unmute yourself. And I guess your question goes to both speakers. Zamir Hassan. Yes.
Hi, good morning, good evening to all. My name is Zamir Hassan. I'm from Bihar, India. I have completed my graduation in journalism mass communication from Mahtani, Hyderabad. Right now, I am pursuing MA in journalism and mass communication. Apart from this, I'm doing freelancing for TwoCircle.net. My question is, ma'am, as we know that India in press freedom rank 160 one among 180 countries in press freedom ranking. So as a early career journalism student, what should be kept in mind when covering human rights issues?
Thank you so much. So in case connection was not very clear, Zamir is asking what should we, the journalism students or young professionals, should keep in mind when covering human rights issues. So I would love to hear from both of our experts. Yuksel, would you like to start off?
First ladies, please, Melissa.
Well, Yuksel, you probably have more experience of this. You've worked in so many conflict zones on the ground. And so, you know, I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts. From my point of view, I'll keep it brief, but I think number one is really verification. And this can sometimes be very, very hard. Sometimes you know that human rights abuses have been committed, but you can't verify them and it's very hard, but you obviously need to have those facts around it to build a credible case. And you also need to, I think, first of all, you know, when you're dealing with people who've really been through trauma, you really need to have a lot of grace in understanding where they're coming from. And as harsh as it can sound, obviously you need to make sure that this is why verification is so important, that, you know, what they remember is accurate, or because facts really, really matter, especially if you think about a human rights abuse and then what you're trying to bring to a court of law. You need to make sure that everything is in check. And those people, when they've been through awful things, there's a lot of emotion in there, so that's what I mean with, you know, approaching those things with grace, and then making sure that you're listening to every single person, that you're really gathering accounts from people to build credible cases that you know that can withstand that kind of high bar. And equally, you really need to be objective in the sense of, obviously the truth is the truth, but you need to consider all parties, everything that went into that particular situation, you know, and make sure that you're really looking at it from all angles. Those would be my main points. But again, that's easier for me to say with distance, because I think from what Yuksel will be able to tell you in those conflict zones at the time where you're seeing them yourself is a little bit different.
Well, Zamir, you know, I mean, the journalism is, you know, in different points when we just look for it's not only to just write stories. You have to just also, you know, to just get a photos for what you have just seen it. If you are just facing off this, you know, human rights issues directly, you know, when I just started the journalism, there was no this, you know, handies or iPhone, which we could just get, you know, take a photos for the actions. But right now, you people are just, you know, lucky for that. They all the time about the human rights issues. You have to just get you know, one photos or videos about this action, these issues to announce to all over the world, because the people are not just believing it about what has just happened, what is just, you know, written. Even you just speak in international areas, no one is just caring about it. It was a couple of days back, maybe you have just heard it, you know, around more than 60, you know, Azul people who were just passing through the Turkish and Greece border. There was a knife, there was a guy who was with the knife. There were some discussions in Twitter. There's a, you know, very well-known journalist from, you know, who's in New York Times. he just asked one question: where is the knife in this picture? Because, you know, I was in that discussion also, because, you know, many Turkish people were attacking up to this, you know, the American journalists. Don't you see this, you know, the knife? There is a knife in the hand of this guy. I also just look in this picture in the first, there was a, you know, this picture is just, you know, it was in all on internet, but there was the picture, the knife was not that much clear to see that one. And the journalist just asked a very simple question: where is the knife? There was no knife in that one. And many people just asked me the same thing: what you mean? And you don't know the situation. But this guy, this journalist, just writing about this human, you know, the problems in this Aegean Sea, the refugees crisis. He's a very well-known guy. He knows the right and right and the wrong things. So that's why I'm saying, for me, it's really just very important about to get to these photos or the videos of these human rights issues.
Could I just add that I think just, sure, you know, it's such a tricky situation, because the problem is that it only takes a couple of bad actors to make the innocent actors' stories disappear. And this is because, you know, yes, there's iPhones and people can take pictures, but if you're not an eyewitness, if you are an eyewitness, it's sometimes a lot easier because you're there, you can see exactly what happened, you can count on yourself, you can document it. But when you are relying on second or third party evidence, there are a lot of bad actors. Sometimes it's these authoritarian regimes themselves who are putting out disinformation, who are putting out fake videos, who are using AI to generate things that look very, very similar, but they do want you to trip up, because as soon as your credibility has gone, that trust in what you're saying has gone, and that serves their purpose, right? They're trying to erode trust in the media. So it's a very, very difficult position, because you want to give these people a voice, but you need to do it responsibly, and you need to do it in a way that you know will stand up. And so that's on us to do more work around it. But, you know, it can sometimes be a really hard position to be in when you know that somebody is telling the truth and they're telling you something atrocious, and you're trying to build a case around it. A case in point would be the Uyghurs, for example, in China. You know, reporting on that has become easier because of satellite imagery and things like that we've got. But these people have been suffering at the hands of that regime for a very long time. And initially, journalists had some of the information, but they weren't able to stand it up. And then again, you always need to get both sides. I know we have some people here from Zimbabwe. I wrote an article just 2 years ago when a very prominent opposition leader was imprisoned. And even though we knew all the facts about that, Ivan Morarire, I still had to wait for days to get a reply from the Zimbabwean government before that could publish, because again, it needs to be responsible, and you need to make sure that you're representing all sides, even if you know they're not going to give you a credible response.
When I was in Afghanistan in 1999, the Taliban was just, captured Kabul, and they were attacking all the regions, like in the north. Also, Ahmet Rashid, the Dostum's soldiers were killed in a container, and they were just announcing it. The Ahmet Rashid Dostum, he himself just announcing that our soldiers were killed, and it's more than 40 people are in a container. This is a human rights crisis. The Reuters, AFP, AP, they were just writing about the stories, but it was not that much affected. That's why I'm saying, when the visual, the resources, when you just put such kind of a footage. And I just got very good connections with the Dostum soldiers and the commanders, and they sent me a video cassette, which we hire us. These are the big the cassettes, and they have just taken the footage of the people when they were just opening the doors of the container. The soldiers are just falling down. It was real affected. Then sometimes you are just writing, even you are Reuters, AP, that much trusted the agencies or the newspapers, that visuals are just making the more effective than the words.
Definitely agree on both sides. And I guess as human rights defenders and journalists reporting on these systematic state-led crimes, there are some times that we may also fall into the dilemma of being sentimental, especially if we are reporting for our own home countries, and that is very, very normal. But we must have some personal and professional standards to keep up the value of our output as well. So turning to Alex Popko, and we can maybe shorten our responses just a little bit so that I have many more questions coming in the line. Alex, are you available to unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm available. My name is Alex. I'm Russian independent journalist. And unfortunately, I understand what you said about VPN, that Russian journalists are refugees. And I know that a lot of my colleagues now are in Germany, and I really appreciate that Germany is ready to help Russian independent journalists. And my question is, I think that for Yuksel more, that do you really believe that, for example, in just journalists, it's not important, Russian or from another countries, can really develop democracy in their country, being, for example, in Germany or in another countries? Because, for example, now I'm in Russia and I have a lot of risks to be in prison because I call war like war. I cover a lot of situations. I go to the courts for political activists, for example, for Vladimir Karamurza, which is a famous political prisoner in Russia. And unfortunately, my colleagues don't have any chance to be in Russia, and they should move to another countries because they want to continue telling stories, telling the truth about the war in Ukraine abroad. But do you believe that it's useful for developing democracy?
I was last week. I had an interview with Dmitry Muratov. You know him, right, Alexei?
Of
He's
course.
a Nobel Prize award winner. I just, made an interview with him. The first question I asked him about the exile journalism, and he said, hundreds of them are just living in Germany, and German government just supporting them in a sense. Okay, I usually just, how can I just, I always just answer the questions directly. Your question was how the exile journalism can affect the democracy in our homelands. I don't think so that, because as I told, when I was just talking about it, when we always just talk as an action, we are writing, we are talking on TVs, we are just meeting with the politicians, European Union, United Nations, we are telling our stories, we are just putting the facts in front of these people, who can just be who can just change the many things. I mean, not in Russia, it's, the situation is a little bit different over there, but this since how many, 1.5 years, yes, when the wars just started last year, it was in February. I mean, we are just feeling it in Germany more than the other countries, this war, the situations here, because we can see the trucks, we can see the tanks in the streets. They are just going to Ukraine, just supporting the Ukrainian journalists. But I don't think so. It's not just going to be too much affected, because even you are just making the, hand-to-hand thousands of journalists that, we would like to just go to the democracy. We don't want the autocratic regimes. We don't want the dictators, human rights activities. If you come together, thousands and thousands of people, these kind of people never just, see us. So this is, I'm here the last 5 years, really. Let me just tell, maybe more than 100 international conferences I have been there. I just talk about the democracy. I talk about the human rights activists in my own country, because I was present for more than a year. I'm always just asking why there is no answer for that. There was against me with the other journalists. We were just 45 journalists together just arrested. There was 10,500 pages against to us. Why? Because I was just working in a news agency as a director. I was working in a newspaper as the director. So what? I mean, I'm just earning my money the last 30 years. I started my career in 1994. I educated, so political science. Now I'm just doing the 2 time. I just studied English literature, but for what? I mean, I didn't just kill any people. I didn't just, corrupted. I didn't just do. I didn't write any against to governments which I haven't seen. So, but you are just going to be a bad guys all the time. It's, I mean, that's why I was just saying autocratic regimes are increasing all the time. They're not just finishing. This is the main problem for us. I don't know. I mean, I don't have any stick in my hand to just make the democracy in Russia or in the world. But, I mean, Dmitry Muratov, he's a journalist. He became a Nobel Prize award, but he's going around with five bodyguards. The Can Dündar, who's an exiled journalist in Germany, from Turkey. I mean, he's going around with 4 bodyguards. He cannot just go outside and alone. Yeah, he's writing, he's speaking in the international areas, but they're not just published in their own countries because people are not just seeing the truth. This is the main problem. I mean, in our generation, I mean, over the 50 years or 60 years, people, they're not using the internet. They are not just using the same problem Dmitry Muratov also taught, The main problem in Russia, the supporters of the Putins are all the old ages people who are in the bars and cafes. They are drinking, talking to each other. They're always saying, okay, Putin is good. He's doing the good things. Same thing in Turkey. The supporters of the Erdogans are all the old people who are not involved in the internet or the internet technology. They are not just reading the realities. They cannot just see. They are not just watching the exact journalists, what they are telling. This is what, yes. Melissa, would you like to add something? Sorry, Cemre, I'm just into.
No, it's okay. I have one practical question for Melissa. If you can wrap your inputs, Melissa, I want to move forward with a couple more questions.
Sure. I would just say that I think it's a terrible question to have to answer because, first of all, there's nothing worse than being forced into exile. I've spoken to so many people, and that can feel like a prison in itself, a very different one, but still because you can't go home. But ultimately, I'd say it comes down to the basic question: where can your voice be heard? Where can you be most effective? So when we're looking specifically at the situation in Turkey, because we've just heard so much and it's awful, it's terrible. But I mean, are you better off being one of the 300, journalists who are in prison where nobody can hear your voice? Or like a Can Dündar, who I've also interviewed many times. And yes, he might have 4 bodyguards, which isn't great. That's not the way to live. But at least his voice is being heard and he's being able to be in front of those other people. So it's an impossible question. There's no great answer, but ultimately, you've got to do what you can with the circumstances that you have. And you've really got to just evaluate it from an unemotional point of view and then try. None of us know what's going to happen.
Because I'm in the head of the Journalist Post magazine, as I told, because I cannot find the people, for example, from Russia. Any person just write to us about the human rights, the activities in Russia or the freedom of press and expression. I cannot find anyone because this is another point of that one. Even in Turkey, no one can just write an article by their names. They have to just get the fake names. This is the reality also because you cannot just change it in unless these people are just going to die themselves, or something which is going to be changed. We have seen it in the elections in Turkey. Everyone is just accepting. Yeah, okay, Erdogan is going, democracy is coming to Turkey, but the fact, nothing has happened.
Thank you so much.
Cemre, I know you want to wrap up and move on, but can I just broaden this out for 1 second?
Sure.
Just want to actually maybe to wrap all of this up together is,
sure.
The point about so we've just heard a Russian voice saying, should I be, where can I be most effective to bring democracy to my own country? None of us should work in isolation. And that's something that social media and forums like this, the very fact that this organization has brought all of them together is that you should be allies in this. So when one person's voice can't be heard, it's up to us, the others in this room, to raise that. You know, we're fighting for democracy in a free and equal world, not just for our own countries. So your struggle isn't only limited to your own. Obviously, there's a focus on that, but that's why forums like this are so effective and so powerful. And that's what all of you should be doing.
Thank you so much. Well, Melissa and Yuksel, if you're not rushing into any other program, maybe I may ask for 10 minutes of more of your time, because we have fascinating questions that I would like to reflect on. But for our participants, as our time is coming to an end, if you do have to leave, we'll see you next Thursday. But I do have one practical question from Rosabelle. I'll be picking out on some practical ones, as we did a great coverage of democracy and journalism. Rosabelle, would you like to go ahead?
Hi, yes, thanks. Yeah, my name's Rosabelle, and I'm from the UK, but I report out in Lebanon. My question was that how do you engage domestic audiences, for example, in the UK, on an international story that's in a country that's thousands of miles away and doesn't affect their life at all, and within that, how do you persuade your editor that this is important, that this person's suffering should be told to a local audience? Yeah, it's directed to both guests. Thank you.
I will start on that. Thank you for the question. I will say that it's really hard. You know, first of all, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. And again, I you know, it was one of those things. I remember again reporting on the Arab Spring, and we all thought Syria was going to change and it was going to be the same. And then what I began to hear was, especially in Western newsrooms, because I was back in London at that point, is people have Syria fatigue. And it's an awful thing, because, you know, you are, as a journalist, again, especially when you're speaking to these people, you're like, no, this is important. And so to answer your question, how do you engage people? I always try and find different entry points, angles to the story that can resonate. I think that, you know, it is very, very tough pitching to editors. And I will say that people always see the 1% of stories that I manage to get through, and not the 99% that I am trying desperately and, you know, get refused, which can be really, really hard. So you, number one, you don't stop trying. And number two, I try and really pick up on common human points. We're all human, right? So if you can find something that people will resonate with. So for example, during the coronavirus pandemic, it was a global pandemic that affected everybody. But reporting here in the US, it was sometimes startling to see how people could be maybe a little bit tone deaf, you know, in the sense of they would be reporting on people not being scared or not getting their booster shots. And when we're part of a global organization, you're really thinking, well, people in the Philippines, frontline workers, people in Zambia, they haven't got their shots, you know, how can you make people here care about that? Because it feels so far away. So sometimes humanizing the story can help, sometimes drawing on the common ways that, you know, people are feeling the same things across different borders. I think social media can also help in that. You know, so often we think of traditional reporting on TV or on digital, but, you know, I have produced shows on Facebook. I've produced Q&As on Instagram. I've produced newsletters. And so there's many more tools for us at our disposal. And sometimes if you can't report on one medium, think, could this be a different story where we could do it a different one? And, you know, how could we pick up and how could we maybe do, like, if you're reporting on Lebanon, think about, okay, well, you know, what parallels can I draw between this and England? Are people there both, you know, crying out against inflation, that they were, but the inflation actually, if that's your entry point, then the inflation in Lebanon is actually so much higher, but it gives you like a way to kind of introduce it into the story and being creative. But it is hard. My main takeaway would be, don't stop trying.
Thank you so much. Yuksel, any short inputs?
My situation is a little bit different. You know, as an editor of this magazine, Journalist Post, we are all welcome about all the stories and about the freedom of expression and press and all over the world. So, you know, I mean, the thing, our audiences are in our homeland in Turkey, because we cannot just reach them. Any stories where we are just getting from Turkey can be, you know, printed or can be, you know, just told our stories in YouTube. The people are just reaching to us through the direct messages in Twitter. They are telling these stories. Then we have to just checking that double check, but that's very difficult to just reach for the government sites, because no one can just going to reply to you. So you cannot just write all the stories because it can just affect for the families of these people. So our situation is a little bit different than what the Melissa told.
Thank you. Going over the questions, I believe we did cover many of them already, but Aina is asking an important question, I guess reflecting on reporting from oppressive regimes. I want to cover this one as well, as this is a quite practical question too. If she's available to ask it herself, that'd be great. You're not unmuted. Let me help you out here. Can you speak now? I guess there's a problem with your microphone.
I think Cemre, she asked the question.
Okay, so she's saying what are the ways to reporting on, if still worth on reporting, social cultural issues without condoning the regime, or maybe doing your job, take it as you wish, staying on the radar, or putting your personal priorities up front. What are your tactics on that? Or any strategies that you would like to recommend to young colleagues reporting from oppressive regimes or places where freedom of expression is not at a desired level?
I'll try and go quickly, but I want to give Yuksel enough time. If I understood this correctly, you're asking, is it still worth, reporting on social and cultural issues in authoritarian regimes, as opposed to just the human rights abuses? And I would say absolutely. The people are not their governments. So, for example, if you look at Iran, the Iranian regime, that's nothing to do with what the Iranian people are actually doing. And sometimes, to the previous question that we just had about how difficult it can be to engage audiences, sometimes these social and cultural issues are exactly how you can get people interested from abroad. So, music is one of those things that's universal. There are so many other things that are universal. And yes, socially and culturally, people are people, right? And we should be able to draw those distinctions. Sometimes those social and cultural issues are just as important because maybe that story will get seen in that country, whereas the story about blatant human rights violations would be banned. So I think, yes. And again, it comes down to, is this a newsworthy story as the first and foremost evaluation of why you would be reporting it. But again, I'm talking about an international organization, which is a news organization. Yuksel, it works for an organization that has a very distinct kind of line of reporting. So I don't know if you would have a different answer.
I'm going to just give two examples. The one of them is in 2016. There was a coup attempt in Turkey. In those days, were too much difficult for us. There was a very well-known and very powerful news channel in Turkey. They were broadcasting documentaries, animal documentaries. The people were just watching they were just watching the bears, how they were just surviving, wolves. It's a natural life of the animals. This was the first example, because the people were just dying in outside, and you are a news channel and you are broadcasting the documentaries, and the people are not just going to learn the realities. The second one is, in Turkey there was a powerful earthquake, thousands of people have died, and a couple of weeks later the Turkish government announced that all the Turkish channels should stop broadcasting about the earthquakes. That makes the people's, the psychologically affecting, So in one sense, yeah, it's right. But in the other hand, when you are just writing the realities in social media, in Twitter, on Facebook, many people are just arrested. Many, more than 40, which I know, just arrested because of their stories, just sent in Twitter or the Facebook or in the YouTube. They just sending their stories. This is the two parts in such kind of the regimes are very difficult to go for the human rights activities.
Thank you so much, both to Yuksel and Melissa for their responses. Before wrapping up today's discussion, Mehmet will take a couple minutes to brief everybody in the room about the journalism project that we have. But I see a couple colleagues have to leave the platform, and we will spend more time on this in the session too. But very briefly, just to keep the heads up.
Well, thanks so much, Cemre. This has been really very helpful. I really enjoyed the conversations and questions asked. So this media and journalism webinars is also empowering young journalists and journalism students to write a news article that will be published on JWF's blog. So this is a hands-on experience. So our colleagues Priyanka will share this international journalism project. So this is, you can write a news article or a news story, and we have all the details in this document, and in next session, we will go more into details. So this, we would like you to, submit this as early as the end of this 5 sessions, and you can work on this as an individual person, as a journalist or a young journalist, or maybe 2 or 3 of the participants may work together on a joint journalism project. And as Yuksel mentioned, maybe some of these articles could be published on their websites, and we can try to look for other opportunities, where these, could be published. And so as I want to show it to you, this is our blog on the JWF website. So previous articles were written here, and we will go into details in the next session. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And on my behalf, I thank you so much for Melissa and Yuksel for wonderful conversations, sharing your experiences, your career for a long time. And thank you for all the participants for joining us. Cemre, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mehmet. And as I mentioned, we'll spend more time on this in the beginning of session 2. Please do review this document. And if you have any questions, it's an optional project, but we would love to disseminate your articles and publish your credible work in our media platforms too. Well, Melissa and Yuksel, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating discussion. I really enjoyed our time here in session 1. That was a blast to open this year's webinars with 2 of you. Any last goodbyes or last concluding words? I would love to have, and we'll wrap it up. Melissa?
I would just like to say thank you. I think that, it's so important for organizations like yours to have these discussions and to have young professionals as well as journalism students join, and for all of us to have a conversation. Yuksel said he's just started his PhD, but I might not be doing a PhD, but we're all learning. We're all learning all the time with new technologies, with new people, with new points of view. And I've just really valued this discussion and appreciate the time.
Thank you so much. Yuksel?
Well, we need, we have to just be hand to hand all the time, because there are a lot of stories which we do not know. There are a lot of stories which should be shared in the world. That's why I'm always there. So you can just contact me through the Twitter, or I can just share my screen again here if I could just done it. I don't know, and you may just contact me easily. Anyway, I couldn't just do that. And thank you very much indeed for the invitation.
Thank you. That was a pleasure to host both of you. We did already share your social media accounts, but I believe colleagues in the room will take the conversation by adding you over your socials as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for your time. And I can't wait to see you all again this upcoming Thursday at the same time. Again, we're going to meet in the Zoom. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
you.